everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Outside Insider podcast here on Philly Sports Network with myself, Liam Jenkins, where we talk all things Eagles from the last 7 days and of course the 7 days to come, which for us today involves the NFL draft. It is Tuesday at the time of recording this podcast, which means the NFL draft is just around the corner. There is not long left to go. Speculation is at an all-time high. Excitement is rivaling that feeling as well. What will the Super Bowl champions do with the 32nd overall pick? We'll be discussing that and much, much more today, and we're going to have a very special guest on this show to discuss those very options, to talk about where the Eagles might be looking to go. Now, we know there's been a lot of talk about potentially trading back, about looking deeper into rounds 2 and 3 and recouping some of the losses from drafts gone by. But what will the Eagles do at 32? Are they going to hit or are they going to stick? And that's what this podcast is going to largely be discussing. Of course, engaging in the NFL draft circus as well, and some of the other fun props and players and opinions and all of that fun stuff. So stick around. One very special guest with some great insight you will not find anywhere else coming up a little bit later. If you're new around here, this podcast will, from this day, I can't exactly guarantee which day it will be, but it will be a weekly show. Now, we bought the show back earlier in the year, I believe it was 3 or 4 weeks ago, and then the calm before the storm set in. But with the draft hitting this week, with OTAs just around the corner, the Outside Insider podcast is back to stay, and because of that, we need your help. So if you enjoy this podcast, if you want to hear more, whether it's in your car, on your phone, somehow on a big stereo somewhere, even in a cinema, I don't know, or a theatre in America, I guess that's what you guys call it, go to iTunes.com, the link is in the description below. You can subscribe for free and download the show. That means you get it automatically onto your device without you having to lift a finger. And there you are. It's as simple as that. You're supporting us, rate it 5 stars, and it's going to help the growth of this podcast. It's going to mean we get more fun guests on as well, like we have today, and really give you guys the best content possible. But enough of the emotional speeches. Let's just take a look, first of all, about how the Eagles got here. Because after all, they are picking number 32, which means that's last in the NFL, which by the snaking order means that they must have finished first, I suppose. Sorry, I forgot they're Super Bowl champions. Yep, the Philadelphia Eagles are Super Bowl champions. A gentle reminder none of you needed, but they're picking 32nd overall because of that. So, as a world champion team, this is an important draft. Now, the Patriots have been here a million times before. They understand this process. They get how it works. For the Eagles, it's a very different story. They've almost been on the edge. They've been on the cusp. They've been to championship games. They've been to the playoffs. They haven't been in this exact spot. And now for the Eagles, there's a lot more to this pick than just, well, we've got to sustain a culture. Because whether or not you're aware, the Eagles don't have a lot of draft capital this season. And that's a bit of a problem considering the holes they have to fill. Because essentially what this means is that the Eagles go from pick number 32 to pick number 130, the bottom of the 4th round, without a pick. Now, this has led many to believe that the Eagles were likely looking to trade out of the 1st round, and we'll get some more clarification and insights on that a bit later, but let's just think a moment about what this team needs. Because Joe Douglas has done a fantastic job of helping Howie Roseman right this ship and guide it down the true direction it needs to be in. Howie's done a brilliant job since returning to the GM position, there's no doubting it. You know, NFL Executive of the Year in everyone's estimations, and he earned the award to recognise that. But if it wasn't for Joe Douglas and this new way of evaluating talent, which helps, you know, the Eagles avoid those dreaded 1st round picks of perhaps either it's the Marcus Smith or the Danny Watkins. We've been there, we've done that, we don't need to see that or again. And Joe Douglas in his 1st season, really, and you look at the picks the Eagles had last year, how many of them contributed in the regular season? You had Derek Barnett, who recovered arguably the greatest play in franchise history, that strip sack on Tom Brady. And of course had a fantastic run during the regular season where he was picking up sacks and really showing the progression in his game. In round 2, Sidney Jones, who's primed to be a starter in his what would be a Ben Simmons-esque rookie season. after making his Week 17 debut against the Cowboys, and after looking at the film and putting that up on YouTube, I think we can all say we're very confident that Jones will live up to that hype of what originally was thought to be one of the top 3 corners in a 2016 draft. Rasul Douglas was a phenomenal prospect out of West Virginia. A mid-round pick, picked in round 3, decides to waltz into the Eagles complex and immediately turn heads in training camp. That was a big thing. But then you have the Ronald Darby injury, and all of a sudden this mid-round pick that's expected to be a developmental corner is outside. This rangy, this ball-hawking corner is making plays. He's picking off passes, he's swatting them away. He wasn't perfect, but Rasul Douglas was a very, very good cornerback in his first year. He helped stabilise the Eagles' ship. Jim Schwartz helped call plays and defensive sort of game plans to play to his strengths as well as Jalen Mills. And that has to be one of the biggest surprises of the season, because the moment Douglas went in and Darby went down, a lot of people were nervous. Douglas reassured that, and after that first week, no one even really cared to mention, hang on a minute, we've got a 3rd round pick lining up against some top talent outside. A little bit deeper in the draft, things do get a bit murky, as we all know. We had the Donnell Pumphrey I don't always call it a misdemeanor. It's just an unfortunate situation where Pumphrey was one of the smaller backs out of SDSU. He didn't really flourish in training camp. A much more physical Corey Clement was the back who stole the show in a very crowded backfield where even Wendell Smallwood was struggling to shine. So then in round 4, he was picked after Matt Collins, but we'll get to him in a moment. You know, he's 5'9", 180 pounds, had over 300 carries in each of his last 2 seasons. And in pre-season, he just looked a little bit out of place. He looked like he was being hit a bit hard, that it shook him up a bit, that he wasn't quite able to shock in the same way he did during SDSU days. He wasn't able to be that versatile threat. He's a great fit for the hybrid West Coast system, but he wasn't really able to prove that during pre-season. Then you had backpack Matt Hollins out of UNC, who emerged as a deep threat out of the slot behind Nelson Aguilar, a big-bodied target who has 4.53 40-yard dash speed and could really blaze those 50-50 balls, and of course had some, great celebrations as well. Nate Gerry earned his niche in the defense, I should say, a little bit later on in the season. Again, a very versatile player, was originally a safety at Nebraska. Didn't really come through. He really earned his shot through special teams and then came onto the linebacker position. And then there was Elijah Qualls, who again began to really carve his niche at the end of the season, was a great bit of defensive depth, and we'll really see him flourish now that Bo Allen has departed for greener pastures, or less midnight green pastures, so to speak. But Qualls was a very stout defensive tackle, a big interior lineman who was strong against the run, and decided that, I think in Joe Douglas's terms, that he could come in and really develop behind Tim Jernigan and Fletcher Cox. And with those two shored up for years to come, the trenches are secure. You've got a developmental talent there alongside Destiny Vial. Great pick. So with that in mind, if you look back, was there one weakness outside of Donnell Pumphrey? Donnell Pumphrey, if I'm right in saying, was the first player drafted by the Eagles to not make the roster. Well, yeah, technically he did, but he was put on IR with that phantom injury that we all know, since a certain 6th round pick back in 2015. That says a lot about the new direction of the Eagles. So they're getting impact from their rookies. And without many picks, and with a few holes to fill, we all know tight end is a big, big one now. We all know linebacker is a key need for the Eagles. We know that some defensive back depth would not go amiss, and for me that's definitely one of my top needs. Where do they go? Because the moment you go into the bottom of the 4th round, you're looking at 5th, 6th, 7th round, you need value, and you're not going to get day one starters. So building through the draft from that regard is perfect. The Eagles are perfectly positioned to build through the draft because the players they're going to bring in will likely not be ready on day one. They will sit behind those veterans. They will sit behind Malcolm Jenkins. They'll sit behind Nigel Bradham. They'll sit behind Zach Ertz. They will get to grips with the game. They'll let the game's speed flow to them. They'll be prepared when their opportunity arises. And just like Trey Burton did, of course, he was an undrafted free agent out of the University of Florida. Earned his way out. When Trey Burton joined the team, he sat behind James Casey, Brent Selleck, and Zach Ertz as a 4th tight end on the roster. He went on to become one of Carson Wentz's top targets due to the chemistry built in training camp when Sam Bradford was taking the ones. And look at where that ended him now. A very handsome payday in Chicago. So building through the draft is something the Eagles need. But this still brings us to this question. If the hits are that important, if they need to find a dominant selection or someone they can hang their hat on, are they going to find that at 32? So what I'm going to do before we get into this interview with our special guest is just go through a couple of different scenarios. And the first argument I really wanted to bring up, and it's quite an unpopular one, is why you avoid drafting skill position players in the first round. And I know a lot of people are against this. And do you know what? I really can't blame them. Because at the end of the day, skill position players are the stars of the NFL. They're who kids want on their jerseys. They're who you retweet on Twitter, who you like on Instagram, who you share on Facebook, who you idolise. You love the hairstyles, you love the speed, the dazzling jumps and leaps and athletic catches and almost unhuman-like manoeuvres that these guys can make. Whether it's barreling through blocks or twirling through the air like a ballerina, there's something special about watching skill players in the NFL do their thing. But unfortunately, when it comes to the Eagles and it comes to the draft, you're not going to always see the best benefit in a draft this crucial by drafting guys outside. There are a few different reasons for this. One, typically outside of their rookie deals, the money value is going to increase. And I would hate to attribute this to that exact angle, but Odell Beckham was just shopped around the league to all 32 NFL teams and had approximately 0 takers. Because of, the personality and the mantra it brings and the almost off-field distraction that he's coming to show. But what we're going to do now is a bit of an exercise, is see, on average, where Joe Douglas drafts wide receivers and where he drafts running backs. Now, think about this in your head. Now, the Eagles aren't necessarily... If the Eagles went for a wide receiver in round 1, you're looking at a Courtland Sutton or someone like that, and it's not incredibly likely. Especially with the signing of Mike Wallace, there's not a tremendous amount of desperate need. They'll likely pick up the 5th-year option on Nelson Aguilar. I would not be surprised to see that done within the next few days. But at the minute, it's Alshon Jeffrey, Mike Wallace, Nelson Aguilar, Matt Collins. They're going to give Shelton Gibson a shot from last year. But with that in mind, there's not an urgent need, okay? So it's going to be a developmental talent regardless. We'll start with wide receivers. Before Joe Douglas joined the Eagles, okay, he drafted 10 wide receivers during his time with the Baltimore Ravens. 10. In your head, just work out if you think the average round that receiver was drafted. The average round. 4.9. 4.9. That's a 5th round pick. Alright? Now, Shelton Gibson, Matt Collins, where were they picked in last year's draft? Because Matt Collins was certainly in that realm, and so was Shelton Gibson. In fact, the only 2 receivers drafted by Joe Douglas in round 2 or higher have been Torrey Smith and Brashard Perriman. Some of the guys that haven't quite worked out, you got Justin Harper, a 7th round pick, David Reed, Tandon Doss, Aaron Millett, Tommy Streeter, I beg your pardon. Most notably, I think Michael Campagnaro will be a familiar name. But they don't draft them highly. And if we look at running backs, okay, now the running back is, on average, the most injured player in the league. We see it all the time. There's a very heavy workload with running backs that the tread on the tyres starts to wear down. They start to pick up injuries during the heart of the regular season, and it is why so many teams are beginning to envelop these committee backfields. Doug Peterson, Corey Clement, Jay Ajayi. So again, on average, Joe Douglas has drafted 8 running backs before joining the Eagles. The average round, 4.62. Where was Donnell Pumphrey drafted? Now I know these arguments can be varied. Team needs change on a year-by-year basis. If you have a dire need for a speedy number 1 receiver, you're going to go and get him. But even so, that is a trend which spans 5 years. You're telling me in 5 years a team doesn't need a wide receiver? In 5 years a team doesn't seek at looking a running back, just even as a backup? The only player that Joe Douglas has selected higher than round 3 as a running back is Ray Rice. That's it. You can find value on running back later on. Just ask Corey Clement. Just ask Byron. I know Byron Marshall's not the best example, but Corey Clement's an undrafted free agent who, in the postseason, made some of the most mesmerising plays, for a need of a better word, in his career. A diving catch in a Super Bowl in the back of the end zone on a screen. Versatility. He was trusted to pound the rock late in games. I know there is a big hype train for Darius Geist. I know there is a big hype train for some of the other running backs that are sitting around that kind of level. Sonny Michel is another one. The Eagles are not going to draft one in the first round. I will hang my hat on that decision. Now, I could be wrong. This could end up on Old Takes Exposed, but I will hang my hat on the decision that, on average, if you're a betting man, you've got a GM that drafted running back in round 4.5 on average over a 5-year span. He's not going to suddenly break that mold and draft it back in the first round, knowing you've got Jay Ajayi and Corey Clement. What happens to them? You bring in a first round running back, that's your guy. That's the running back you hang your hat on. You go, do you know what? This is your offense, your backfield. We're a balanced offense. It's 50-50. You're the workhorse. They didn't have that with Blunt. They didn't have that with Ajayi. They didn't have that with Smallwood. They didn't have that with Pumphrey. Do you think with that amount of depth you're going to bring in Darius Geist? It's not happening. It is, unless there is a trade scenario that convinces the Eagles otherwise and gives Howie Roseman the flutters, they're not taking a running back in the first round. Which brings us very, very neatly to my second argument related to this. In the, if you compare wide receivers and running backs to cars, they're very much the convertibles, the sports cars, the, wow, I want that when I'm older. Wow, look at that convertible roof. Look at that go down the... Is that highway? Jesus, I'm getting very American. Offensive linemen, defensive linemen, they're the trucks. The cars that get the job done. They're not the sexy picks. They're not the picks that are going to be on the cover of Sports Illustrated. But they help win a Super Bowl. Lane Johnson. They help win a Super Bowl. Fletcher Cox. Do we need to go any deeper? The consensus, and the thing is, 1 year ago, I reported that before the draft, the team's consensus was to build through the trenches. And not blowing my own trumpet, I'm just trying to add some validity to what I'm saying right now, because it's the same person that told me. It's the same again. Alright, last year, when the Eagles were building through the trenches and everyone else was focusing on some of the razzle and dazzle you can get in the first round, would it be a cornerback? Would it be a wide receiver? Would it be Dalvin Cook? No. It wasn't. It was Derek Barnett, and it was the best decision the team have made. Because building through the trenches is where football's won, because the picks last, the production is high, and the two most important things in a game of football are to protect your quarterback and to bring down the opposing one. The rest of it is negotiable. The rest you can schematically adjust. You can get an advantage through coaching or through intangible characteristics. Offensive linemen, now I'm not saying the Eagles are going to go out and draft Connor Williams or Isaiah Wynn in the second round and trade back. But that, in my opinion, they are much more likely to bring in an offensive or defensive lineman than they are a study wide receiver or a starlet running back. Now, with that in mind, we've spoken about some of the options here. What I would love to do is bring on our very, very special guest. So without further ado, we're going to cut to an exclusive interview. You will not find this level of information anywhere else, this level of insight anywhere else. It is my pleasure of the Outside Insider podcast to bring to you a theoretical drum roll and a special interview. Okay, so joining us now on the Outside Insider podcast, one very special guest and one of probably the best dressed beat writers and radio personalities out there, Benjamin Allbright. Ben, thank you so much for joining the show. How are you doing today?
I am doing outstanding. How about yourself?
I'm doing well. So over here in the UK, draft week's picking up. Momentum's kind of getting there, obviously covering the Eagles, but in America, it's a very different tempo right now. Teams frantically trying to get those last few notes together. I mean, how big is this draft now? I mean, obviously I think the importance of it is going up as the years go by as teams seek to build through it, but is there something about this class that just seems a little bit different to you?
Well, this class is a little more murky at the top. It's a little bit more difficult than normal trying to figure out who's going to go where than it has been in previous drafts. I think that's of interest. Obviously, this is a multi-billion-dollar revenue generator for the National Football League, so it's in their interest to string it out as long as possible. But normally we have a pretty good picture at this point, and it's still a bit murky here.
Absolutely. So I'll try and get into as much of the nitty and gritty as we can shortly, but I think the first topic straight away, even though it's not quite Eagles related, has got to be quarterbacks, because of the big names this year, it seems like there is just a constant deck shuffling. Like 1 minute is going to be, Sam Darnold at the top, and the next minute it's Baker Mayfield. As the draft nears, we're just under a week away now. I mean, what's the pecking order looking like? What's the consensus now going in towards this weekend?
I don't think there is, necessarily one. I think a lot of the things that you see in media is media trying to maximize or capitalize on the mystery. Every new article going a new direction generates new clicks for their website. So, I think a lot of guys who don't actually have any information put out pieces on things they don't know what they're talking about. And that's how we kind of get this confusion, toward the end. I think, I've said since January, my gut is Sam Darnold goes number one. Baker Mayfield's getting a little buzz this weekend, but, I still think it's Darnold. We'll see how it shakes out.
Yeah, I think you've summed up the media landscape perfectly there, and it's the one thing that we definitely try to pride ourselves on at Philly Sports Network. With quarterbacks in mind then, as we get towards the bottom end of the draft, how important are the quarterbacks in setting the tone for that? Because obviously you look at a team like Miami, and if a quarterback run starts and they're all of a sudden left with a Lamar Jackson and then they can't maybe get the guy they want, could that really dictate the tempo for the rest of the teams?
Oh, absolutely. I think you try to look at your situation and what improves your team the best, what are the deficiencies, what are the best players available, and try to calculate accordingly. Miami has Ryan Tannehill under contract. They just reworked his deal, and he's going to be under contract there for the next year or two at least, either way. So while they may be tipping their hand in terms of liking a Josh Rosen, I don't know that necessarily that's the primary pursuit, because, there are other holes, and they're financially tied to a quarterback that they're not going to stick on the bench at $18 million a year.
Absolutely. So we'll swiftly move on to the Eagles then at pick number 32, the last pick in the first round of the draft. And for those guys, it's very important because obviously they're without a pick on day 2 of the draft, so they don't pick again until the bottom end of that 4th round. Now, a lot of the buzz this week has seen them potentially, trading back and looking at being very active on the night of the NFL draft. What is it you've heard about the Eagles and their intentions going into this weekend with that 32nd overall pick?
Well, the Eagles would like to trade back. That's their primary goal. They would like to multiply their picks over day 2, get some more depth, replace some of these high-priced free agents they brought in the last couple of years, and have that underlying depth to be able to do that. I don't know. It takes 2 to tango. You got to get a trade partner in order to be able to go backwards. So you can't just wish it to happen. But I think that looking at all the scenarios, looking at what they've got laid out there, I think trade back's most likely. If they get stuck in that position, maybe look for them to go after a linebacker.
So the one thing that I've wondered, especially with the Eagles' position, is let's just propose for a minute that they don't trade back. How much of an impact would that have? Is there a big drop-off, do you think, between, let's say, round 2 to 4 this year compared to last year? Because I know in certain positions last year, there was a really deep run, especially wide receivers and corners. This year, it doesn't seem to be that strong in the positions of need for the Eagles.
I guess that's partially true, certainly with the wide receiver position. I think there's some corners there that you could have day 2 that might turn into something. I would suggest that the Eagles, like I said, really want to get that linebacking position really shorn up, and that's a position they would look to on day 2, and then probably take a chance on some athleticism at the wide receiver or corner position in day 3, rather than looking for a guy that's maybe more polished and ready to go.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think obviously when we talk about linebackers, we've got to discuss, the big signing of Nigel Bradham earlier this offseason. I mean, the way that Howie Roseman's built this roster, going from the ball outward and solidifying the trenches, it's since the Eagles' Super Bowl success, is this a trend that you've then seen maybe try to almost be replicated from other teams in the league, where the trenches have now become a sudden pivotal focus?
Well, it should be. The trenches is where the game is born, and that's where it should be focused. We see vacillating philosophies every couple of years. One team goes run heavy, one team goes pass heavy, one team goes trenches, one team goes skill position. We've seen different trends and things ebb and flow in the league, but I think the way to maximize your success is to make sure that you can protect your passer and you can rush their passer, and I think that's kind of the Eagles' philosophy.
Absolutely. And you mentioned there running the ball. There's been a lot of hype, I think, around Sony Michel and Darius Geist to the Eagles. And while both backs are great fits, for me personally, running backs get injured more than any other position in the NFL. And Joe Douglas doesn't tend to draft running backs until on average around round 4. Is there a potential for these running backs to maybe land at 32 if the Eagles stick around? Or again, would you consider that a reach given the position?
Well, I think there's going to be plenty of running backs there. I think Geist is probably going to be gone by the time the Eagles are drafting, but Sony Michel might be there. I think that for the Eagles, if they could trade back out of that first round pick, there's going to be tons of running backs there available in the second, third. You can get guys that are going to be 85, 95% as productive as maybe the top 3 there in the second and third round and not have to spend nearly as much money doing it. So Howie Roseman is a very, very intelligent general manager. I think he knows that. I think that's his preferred, modus operandi here, but I don't know that necessarily it'll work out. You got to find a trade partner, but I think that's the ideal situation for them.
And that's something that's definitely, I think, coming to my mind a lot more over the last few months, is that Howie Roseman's now, he's kind of established this reputation as one of the most notorious hard bargaining traders in the league. He's going to win the deal almost at the end of the day. Does this now reduce leverage for the Eagles? Because everybody knows they want to trade back into round 2 and 3. They want to recoup those day 2 picks. Given Roseman's nature as well, that they know they drive the hard bargain, does this almost land leverage with the opposing trade, partner?
Well, I think that I think everybody thinks that they're going to get the best of the guy they're trading with, whether who that is. We see it year after year after year with people trading with Bill Belichick and getting ripped off. So, it's certainly an established, phenomenon where I think people think that we're still going to get the better of a guy who's already got the savvy veteranship of doing it. Howie's in that level with Belichick in terms of being able to make those kinds of deals. So, I think they'll have plenty of trade partners there. I think they'll have plenty of opportunities. The question is just if it's the right one.
The one thing that I think has paradoxed me, especially just doing mock drafts and looking at teams' patterns, is there are a few teams just ahead and even, dipping into the first stage of the second round who could also be looking to trade back. I think Jacksonville could be a great shout to trade back into day 2 as well. If a team before Philadelphia trades back into that second round, would that then hurt? Is it a case of who fires the gun first that's going to get that best deal, do you think?
I don't think so. I think it's all conditional on who's available. And in the desperation to get that person. I think there will be teams that trade in ahead of the Eagles, and I don't think that will diminish the appetite for the Eagles pick if the player that team X, Y, or Z wants is there.
Now, every year I think everybody gets draft crushes, whether it's a small school sleeper or just a big name that you just can't help but get glued to the screen when they play. Who's been that one guy this year that you just can't take your eyes off and seeing his stock either rise up or maybe just sitting under the radar a little lower than it should be?
For the quarterbacking side, I think everybody's finally caught on to Kyle Lauletta.
Yeah.
I think he's a guy that is, kind of a 2-year project, but he could be something in the NFL. I've heard a lot of buzz about Frank Ragnow lately, the interior lineman out of Arkansas. I think he's going to be a stud in the NFL, and he hasn't really gotten a lot of run. You look down the list, the wide receiver, James Washington out of Oklahoma State. People are mocking him in the second, third round. I think he's a first-round talent. So I think he's a guy that could absolutely be a stud in the league, and I don't think he's getting the run that he should either.
Absolutely. I mean, if there was one bold prediction you would make for this NFL draft, given all the intel that you have, is there something that you would think just out of the ordinary that is suddenly quite likely?
Interior offensive linemen. There's going to be a lot more of them go earlier than people think. Most people have maybe one center mocked in in their mock drafts, and I firmly believe that 2 or 3 of them could go in the first round. So, I think that's the thing. I think people forget the interior offensive linemen because they're not sexy, but in the end, I think you could see 2 or 3 of them go in the first round.
Absolutely. Now, I wanted to deviate a little bit away from the draft, if that's okay, and just talk about kind of how you got to this position as well, because I know a lot of the guys listening to this who have followed either at Philly Sports Network or are familiar with you on Twitter as well, and the one thing that always stands out is that you just stand behind your opinion 100%, you don't let people kind of down-talk you or get under your skin, and just do your best to kind of really keep that under wraps and keep everything in like a straight black and white line. I mean, how difficult is that when you've got guys coming at you or trying to downplay your opinion or your intel or your sources to not take that to heart?
Well, it is tough, and it does wear on you after a while. You get a lot of that. You get a lot of people, everybody stamping their foot and talking about their opinion and this, that, and the other. In the end, we're all just dudes talking football. I think the main thing to remember is if you've got an opinion on something, how did you arrive at that opinion? If you arrived at it with actual evidence, then it will be difficult to sway you off of that opinion because it took evidence to arrive there. People who are wishy-washy in their opinions are probably people that don't consider all the evidence to get there. And so, for me, I can be moved off of an opinion. I just need evidence to do it. I let the evidence take me to the conclusion rather than pick a conclusion and cherry-pick data to support that.
I think if everyone had that mentality, the world would be a much smoother place to kind of operate in sports media. Especially nowadays as well, where hot takes are a thing and everyone just wants to be the guy as opposed to the guy that gets it right. And especially in draft season, the one thing that I found particularly difficult to navigate is you never know the reason that information's being put out there. I think the moment information's out, it's out there for a reason. Either it's maybe someone wants a bit of a leverage for a negotiation for a contract or a trade or whatever it may be. And then so that information's either entirely true for that reason or entirely false for that reason. And that personally, that's something I've had to try and kind of navigate and find out what's best to put the chips on and what's best to kind of hang off. Now the experience you've got behind you, and obviously is that the prestige has gone up and your experience has as well, how easier is that now to kind of make those split-second decisions? If you get something that could break 10 minutes later as a huge story, just to sit back on it and maybe let it simmer?
I have a personal rule that I don't put information out there that I don't have multiple sourcing on. And when I say multiple sourcing, I mean first-hand sourcing on. It's fine to take other people's word for something. There are certain people in this industry I trust, but I am one of those skeptical by nature people, and so I don't really like to just take something somebody tells me and run with it. I want to know the why. I want to know those kinds of things. And I think over my career, what it's evolved to now is kind of an information brokerage where I have guys from around the league that'll tell me some things that I ask because they want to know things that I know from other people, and so it becomes this this kind of web of me giving information from other people to one party, and they turn around and give me some information for another, and that helps all these teams kind of gauge the temperature around the league in terms of who's going to go where and help them make their plans a little bit easier.
Absolutely. So quite neatly going back off of that, then obviously your almost main bulk of your career is situated around Denver and that sort of area. So when you look at the Broncos this offseason, I mean, again, I know it's not quite Eagles related, but me being a massive cornerback guy, having published the cornerback guide earlier this year, what are your makings of the offseason dealings there and what the Broncos' needs are now going into this draft?
Well, they definitely need another corner. Let Aqib Talib walk. Talib has kind of lost a step. He's still a top 20 corner in the league, but he's kind of lost a step over the last season. We saw him get absolutely roasted by Alshon Jeffrey in that Eagles game this past season. He took a lot of plays off this year. It's one of those things. Part of his game isn't necessarily being superior athletically. It's getting inside your head and making you think that. And I think he lost a little bit of that edge this past season. So the Broncos couldn't afford to keep him at the price tag that he wanted, and he got to move on and go reunite with Wade Phillips, something he wanted anyway. I think the Broncos are going to look heavily at corners in this draft, try to find the right guy for them. I know they really like Denzel Ward. I don't know if they're going to be able to get him. I think the Broncos' plans include shoring up the offensive line, shoring up the secondary, and maybe trying to find an explosive game breaker tight end as well, and see if they can compete in what should be a tough division.
Absolutely. It's definitely going to be a fun weekend. Ben, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. If you want to follow Ben for some of the most fire draft coverage across this weekend, at Allbright NFL on Twitter, it's a move you certainly won't regret. Thank you for joining the show.
Absolutely. Anytime.
A massive thank you to Benjamin Allbright for taking time out of what must be a remarkably busy schedule to come and talk with us. And we've spoken about the NFL draft all day long now. But before we go, before we go and call it a day, we've still got a little bit of time left. So what I wanted to do was something a bit fun. Okay, and that was just take a look at some of the things I'm looking forward to in the draft overall. Because, you know what, the draft is one of those events. It's like a media circus. There's only one of them a year. And let's be honest, if the Eagles do trade back, which does seem very likely at this point, you're going to stay up. Or at least for me, I mean, the event starts at 1 a.m, right? So I'm there at 1 a.m. watching pick number 1, or 8 p.m, sorry, 1 a.m. Oh, my head is so far gone with the draft already. I'll be there at 1 a.m. watching the first pick. And by the time pick 32 rolls around, it's going to be about, I reckon, 5 or 6 in the morning. And then they're going to go, yeah, the Eagles have traded back. The Eagles have traded back. So, Liam, get up again tomorrow night. Go on. Go get some sleep, you silly sausage. And a 9-hour shift at work. Ignore that. So thanks for that, Howie, in advance, if you do decide to trade back, for probably buying Monster Energy drink out of stock, because I'm going to need that. But it's a long day, you know. If you're an Eagles fan and you're watching just for that one team and you don't really care about the rest of the NFL, you're watching pick after trade after Roger Goodell boo in Dallas. It's going to be tedious. So let's just think of some things to look forward to. Number 1, we have got the ultimate card shuffle, as myself and Ben alluded to earlier, when it comes to quarterbacks. Nobody knows who's going number 1 overall. No one has a clue. And you can look at all the insiders, all the reports, all the media hustle that you want. No one has got a Scooby-Doo who the Cleveland Browns are picking number 1. And the great thing about that is that number 2 doesn't have a clue, number 3 doesn't have a clue, and so on and so forth until around pick number 9 or 10. So the question is, who's the first quarterback off the board? Now, if I'm the Browns, for me it's Sam Darnold. I think he's the best fit for their system. I think he's the best character guy. They're going to get the most mature. I mean, they don't want to take any red flag risks or have someone that's going to steal the spotlight and attract the wrong kind of attention. Now, I'm not saying Baker Mayfield will, because I personally love Baker Mayfield more than any other quarterback in this draft. But I think Darnold's a guy they can just safely say, do you know what? That's a safe pick. That's our guy for 10 years. Well, maybe not 10, he's from USC and we've seen Matt Barkley, but no shots fired here. We're not looking at USC quarterbacks. But I think Baker Mayfield will be the guy at 2 or 3. The Giants are in a very, very interesting spot. Where do they pick a running back or do they go quarterback? I would say if you're the Giants, you take a shot on Saquon Barkley if the Browns don't. But if you're the Browns and you don't even like Sam Darnold that much, or you like him just as much as another quarterback, why not take a generational running back and then stick him with a quarterback as well? That's what's best for business, right? That's what everyone wants to see. A dynamic offense and 2 star-studded number 1 level talent being injected into the Cleveland offense. Surely that's what we came for. Probably not. It's the Browns. But hey, that's going to be fun to watch for the first 20 minutes of the draft. What I'm really intrigued by, and this will come as a shock to absolutely nobody, is the cornerbacks. Because I think as you get towards the bottom of the first and the start of the second round, as I told Ben, there are a few teams where you're going to start a DB run. So if you are the Philadelphia Eagles, or you are the Chicago Bears, or you are the Denver Broncos, or you could argue the Atlanta Falcons, or there are several cornerback needy teams in this draft. If you're any of those guys, there is quite a big parity between the round 1 picks, who are 2 or 3 at most. You're looking at Denzel Ward, arguably Jair Alexander, potentially a couple of others, depending how obviously you view Minkah Fitzpatrick as a safety or a cornerback. But I think once you get past that, it becomes a free-for-all, because the Browns have one of the first picks, they need cornerback help. The Colts have one of the first picks, they definitely need cornerback help. And if you're a team in the second round who are scrapping before you know it, Isaiah Oliver's gone, Mike Hughes is going to be gone, and you're going to be left with corners you don't particularly feel strong on because they slip into round 3 to 4 talent. So if you want a cornerback, you may see teams trading up for one, and that would be my dream scenario, because 70-page cornerback consensus you can catch out at phillysportsnetwork.com. It's going to be a lot of fun. And I think that seeing teams trade up to find that DB, they can finally say, look, we've got some stability in our secondary now. That's an interesting process. And this is one of the deepest cornerback drafts I've seen. The star power year 1 year ago in 2016 was much more prominent. I feel that the depth in this year's draft is a lot kind of replacing that in many senses. And you're going to find guys like Parry Nickerson out of Tulane in maybe round 6 or round 7. I mean, for another example, I don't want to spoil it if you haven't read it yet, but there is one cornerback I would urge you to read the cornerback consensus, because you just have some remarkable stories in there. And with DBs this year, and it's all about guys wanting to find those versatile DBs who will play anywhere, who can come in the nickel, who can line up over the top. But you have got small school sleepers who've come out of now Illinois State, for instance, like Devontae Harris, who tore his bigger and smaller intestine in high school and is still applying for the NFL draft, and he's going to get drafted. You couldn't ask for a more fairy tale draft for corners, and I'm really excited to see how that pans out. And best of luck to Devontae as well. Phenomenal prospect, a very calm and humble human being, and it was a real pleasure to talk with him. We will have also a bit of a spoiler announcement. I've been grinding this interview out for about a month now, and unfortunately the timing's never been there. But we will have a Ronnie Harrison interview just after the draft. So regardless of where he lands, we will have a Ronnie Harrison interview. So we can pray it's Philadelphia, because that is my dream scenario right now, to be the first guy to have a Harrison interview. I would be a little bit weak at the knees, I'm not going to lie. But that's something I'm really looking forward to, regardless of where he ends up. He's one of my favourite prospects in this year's draft, so I want to see where he goes. Other than that, can we just appreciate for a moment two things. One of them not Eagles related, the other one is. So we'll start with the non-Eagles related one, okay? And I still can't get my head around this, so please bear with me. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers, alright? Let's just picture that team, that franchise, with the cannons in the stadium where you can sit in a big pirate ship like a kid's theme park and watch a football game, okay? Is having a parrot deliver their draft picks. A parrot. Now, is the parrot saying the name of the draft pick? Is it delivering a bit of paper and then the commissioner's got to unfold it? What if it's Claude tears through it? What if it doesn't arrive and it flies off and they've got to make up it? You just don't know. There is a parrot delivering draft picks. I will say that again. A parrot delivering draft picks. I mean, if that's not reason to watch an NFL draft where college players make dreams a reality, I mean, what else is there? What else is there? But do you know what the thing I'm most looking forward to is, more than absolutely anything, is that nearly 12 months ago, a certain individual, a certain former wide receiver by the name of Drew Pearson, came onto the stage in the city of brotherly love and didn't really get on with the crowd very much, did he? He was a little bit out of place and was saying, you know, the world champion Dallas Cowboys and how amazing they were and how the Eagles fans gave him a living essentially just by ruining their happiness all the time. And now the Eagles, by some massive coincidence, get to go straight into Dallas with David Akers, one of the true kicking greats of a generation, as Super Bowl champions. I mean, let's just let that sink in. Have a break. Sit down. If you're holding a beer, take a sip for me. If you're not, have one when you get home. Or raise your fist in the air and shout dilly dilly as loud as you can. What a moment that is going to be. What a moment. You could not ask for a better way to get, revenge for what happened 1 year ago. And those are the things I'm really looking forward to. So before we go and wrap this up, I know we're nearing like 50 minutes now, and thank you so much again for tuning in. I did just want to do one more feature where I give my consensus pick on who the Eagles are taking at 32. Now, if we're avoiding a trade back, if we're not looking at trading back, okay, my pick at number 32, just a few days before the NFL draft, this will be in my final mock as well in a couple of days' time, would be, everyone's favourite draft sleeper. It'll be Leighton Vander Esch. Without a shadow of a doubt. If he is on the board at 32, you run to the podium and you pick his name up. One, he's got a double-barreled surname, so that just sounds awesome. Two, he's a small school sleeper. Three, the Eagles linebacking depth chart, okay? Let's just take one final look Nigel Bradham signs a long-term extension with this team, and very rightly so. Harry Roseman making a beautifully crafted decision there to bring back arguably the most impact player on defence. Outside of that, Jordan Hicks enters his contract year having injury setbacks in 2 of his 3 years in the NFL. Big question marks. Michael Kendricks, his future at this point could not be predicted by Nostradamus. It is getting ridiculous. He could be a target to be dealt on draft night. Corey Nelson was picked up by the Denver Broncos. He's going to be competing for a depth role. Joe Walker has had a torn ACL and some injury setbacks. Camus Grugier-Hill is one of my favourite linebackers on the team. I loved him in New England in preseason. I love what he did last year, but he is a special teams guy. I actually led the Eagles in special teams tackles. That's his role. Brilliant young prospect. Paul Warrilow is not going to cause any worries though, because he's going to be a veteran Stephen Tulloch kind of role. And Nate Jerry, after joining the team, as we mentioned earlier, carved his role on special teams. There is no long-term option at linebacker outside of Nigel Bradham. This is a strong linebacker class. Leighton Van Der Esch had a brilliant offseason with the Senior Bowl. He had a brilliant final season at Boise State. You run to the podium, you pick up that linebacker, you run for the hills, you solidify that defense, and Jim Schwartz dominates another year in a row. My name is Liam Jenkins. This has been the Outside Insider podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you want to download this show, there is a link in the description below. Please rate us on iTunes. Give us those 5 stars and those lovely words, or the angry ones if you hate it. Follow me on Twitter at LiamJenkins21 or at PhiladelphiaSN. And a massive thank you to Benjamin Allbright for joining the show and breaking down what's going to be a marvellous NFL draft. We'll see you next week to recap everything NFL draft related. It's going to be fun, so stay tuned.